Hello, everybody. Welcome to Samveo's Industry Video Series. My name is Lonnie Cumpton, and I'll be your host today. Also with us is Jeff Meurrens, the president of Baxter Kenworthy Electric, and we'll be talking about all things prefab. So, to start with, Jeff, why don't you give us just a little bit of background of yourself, kind of where you come from and, what makes Jeff Jeff?
I'm not sure what makes me me, but I've lived in the Omaha, Nebraska area all my life. I joined the electrical industry as an apprentice back in '91. I think I was about 23 years old at the time. And that was the beginning of an actual career, just worked jobs up to that point, nothing you could see doing the rest of your life. And it was, I remember when I got into the trade, I took a pay cut from about $11, $12 an hour to packing house to $5.94. So I took a half cut in pay, and I loved every minute of it because I finally had found something I really enjoyed doing. So it's been 30 years now, and I worked for a contractor and a good contractor. They're now a competitor, but for about 15 years, 16 years, and I had an opportunity to purchase this company. I was just a field guy. I ended up working in the office and helping. What my job was prior to buying the company was helping up and comers that are coming up through the trade to help them lay out and plan their projects. And so I was always good at that. I was kind of a natural, as I'd worked in the field, I knew what struggles there were, and I had always tried to overcome myself, and I was able to figure out ways to do that. So that's how I got to where I am today. I had an opportunity to purchase this company that was it had a good name, had been around since 1932, and the owner had passed away, and so I had this opportunity to come in and purchase the company. And what excited me about it was they were dinosaurs. They didn't have emails, they didn't use computers. And, my experience was I was all about that technology. AutoCAD, Revit wasn't dominant then, but I was like a kid in a candy store. I'm like, God, I'm an Einstein compared to these guys, so this will be easy. Of course, it wasn't, but definitely gave an advantage and could bring a lot of value to that company.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, like I said earlier, today we're going to be talking about all things prefab, and Baxter Kenworthy's got a great reputation for doing a lot of prefab. So why don't we start off with just tell us a little bit about where you feel Baxter Kenworthy is today in the grand scheme of prefab, arena, I guess I would call it.
Well, in the grand scheme, everything, you live in your own little box, so it's hard to tell until you really get out and talk to other people. But in our area, in the Midwest, in the Omaha, Nebraska, Council Bluffs area, anyways, where we're at, we've always been the leaders in it. We were one dominant one. There was probably another one that in this area that had done it, had been into it when we first started, but all of my competitors, they were all kind of laughing, chuckling, poking at us, saying, "No, that'll never work. They're crazy over there." And that was 13, 14 years ago. And now, out of necessity, you see everybody kind of trying to see what this is about, trying to get started in it. And really, it's kind of fun for me because I get to see them where we were 10 years ago, trying to figure it out.
I was going to say, I bet none of them are giving you a hard time today about it.
They are not. They all, as they get into it and they build their first box assembly, now their website explodes, and you think they're professionals at doing all of it and been doing it forever. It's kind of funny.
And it's been very interesting for me as in my career, I've worked with and consulted for countless numbers of companies, kind of all the way across, from the design side to the construction side, trade part of the conversation to the owner side part of the conversation. And it's been interesting as it seems like all of these things kind of have been building up over the years. And now, it seems pretty consistent industry wide, everybody wanting to be able to effectively, do prefab, or, as some people refer to it as offsite construction, or others refer to it as construction manufacturing. So there's a few different terms that are used in that arena. But I guess if you don't mind, give us a little bit of a history, lesson on, kind of how, Baxter Kenworthy got to where they are from a prefab standpoint. How did it kind of get started, and has there been an evolution through, through the process to get you where you are today?
Oh, absolutely. So I bought the business in 2000, late 2006, and jumped in pretty quick. Took on some pretty large projects and figured out pretty fast that technology alone or your ideas that you have, it's going to take more than that to maintain a successful company. We tried the traditional way. I brought a little planning and layout experience to the company, but and it was helpful. But I could see pretty quick that we needed something else. And I wasn't aware of prefab yet. I think it was just popping up in seminars and conventions, and that's where I'd heard about it first, and it seemed very intriguing. We had a job going on in 2007 that we had. It was a huge campus, had 60 electricians on it, and you typical you get more than 10 guys on a job, and the troubles begin. You can't keep track of everybody. It's hard to manage that many people. Have the structure of management to make sure you maximize production. So it was it was pretty risky, and so we had successful jobs, and we had jobs that were losers. We had it was just too much of a yo-yo effect. You never knew the outcome of a job till you were finished. And so once I caught on to the prefab thing, we started. It was kind of cute looking back. We started with mimicking what you seen manufacturers trying to provide you. So I think Beeline came out with the box assemblies. So we started off with purchasing them, and it worked to a certain extent. We just kind of threw it out, didn't educate anybody on it. Just says, hey, we're going to send you these box assemblies. Use those instead of loading the baker scaffold up and so forth. Then we'd walk on the job and see how it's going, and you'd see all the plaster rings in a pile in the middle of the room because the guys just weren't used to installing boxes with the plaster rings and so forth. So it's like, hey, wait, we got to educate them on this a little bit, or have somebody oversee it to watch it. We just tried so many different things, but we things slowed down about then. That was 2008. We seen it coming. We had a fair amount of work when that hit, but we seen the major slowdown coming. So we started to, I analyzed it, and I'm like, I could keep a guy busy and at least break even building these myself, ordering the parts and building them myself, and keep some key guys busy throughout it. So it was kind of cute. We set up a baker scaffold in the what's now a break room and built box assemblies and thought we were prefabbing. So it was very, very slow evolution. We pushed prefab. We told the guys in the field, we want you to anything that's an assembly of any sort, whether it's repetitive or not, we want you to order it through the shop and we'll build it. And that never really caught on.
Yeah,
it's just if they have a hard time grasping that everybody wants to do things their way. And in addition, we had as we pushed it more and more, we had you have people that just don't buy into it. So we parted ways, whether it be on their terms or my terms. I always joke that if I could go back knowing what I know now and go back to the beginning, I'd just fire everybody and start with a clean slate with guys with no field experience that are just going to do things the way you'd like them to be done. So
yeah, it's such an interesting piece of the puzzle. As I go around and I talk to companies all over the country, it's amazing to me because it's one thing to prefab something; it's another thing to get the field to actually install that prefabbed item.
yeah,
And the worst scenario I've seen wasn't so much a few mud rings over in the corner, but literally 2 tractor trailer loads of prefabbed assemblies that they just would get them on the site and they'd throw them in the trailer and they'd order the materials and stick build everything themselves. And
yeah,
from from that organization standpoint, they felt pretty good because they were doing all this prefab.
Yeah.
That whenever we actually got out and looked, it was like, well, yeah, the prefabs ended up in that trailer as just scrap, just junk.
You're right.
So it's such an interesting conversation.
And,
So it's one of the things when I talk to people a lot. I talk about, if your prefab isn't improving the environment for the field personnel, then is it really something you should be doing or not?
yeah.
It's what one of those questions I always ask. So I guess in that evolution that you had, was there a point of aha moment where it really started clicking, and can you pinpoint a time or an activity that really started transitioning you into having that more success in the prefab side?
I can absolutely. For years, we just went through we created the catalog. We defined standard assemblies, and that's what we pushed. But it really didn't take, even the standard assemblies and catalog, the field just didn't really catch on to it. And so what really changed it, our defining moment was um, introducing Revit and the pre-planning process. Because what we then did was we had a good process. We still have a good continuously improving process for start to finish of a job, how you lay out, create your conduit schedules, and planning it on paper. But what really changed it for us was the modeling.
Hmm.
So now we took the individualized layout from the field. It used to be you'd throw a guy on the job, you'd help him lay out, you'd show him how and whatnot, but everybody's different.
Hmm.
If you have 10 guys out there, regardless of what company you are, doing the same job, you're going to get 10 ultimately different results in varying levels. So, and we had experienced that. Some guys were really good at it. And I tell them to this day, if everybody did it like you, none of us would have to prefab. But not everybody's that at that high level. So we pushed that process, or I'm sorry, pulled that process from the field and brought it in house. I brought my key guys from the field, the most experienced and expensive, which is very hard to get your mind around, and brought them in. We brought Revit into the mix. We always used AutoCAD. Actually, in the beginning, we did use AutoCAD, but it's very difficult to draw things in a 2D environment, and there's just so many complications to that. Once we introduced Revit into our process and we lay out a job, every piece of it. Now we do, but we model that and build not just installation sheets, but spooling sheets for fabrication. And that
Hmm.
became then the installation sheet. We always model everything we do. We try to make it big, colorful buttons, big letters. You open the box up and there's easy to read print, not a complicated architectural, structural, something that you got to interpret into what it's ultimately going to look like. We gave them, in essence, a picture with a ABC kit to install.
Hmm.
That changed prefab. We then, we'd always struggled keeping prefab even going, keeping somebody in the shop to very consistently having a crew back there, and has grown since then. We just no matter what you build, there's always a better way to build it. You're always improving that, so you're always getting better no matter how good you think.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing that was your kind of your crux point, or that turning point for you, because even today, as we talk to companies that want to get into prefab or want to start in that process, or even companies that are doing it but they want to scale it. The question always comes up: do you have to have a 3D model to do prefab, or do you have to do BIM to do prefab, or do you have to have prefab before you can do BIM? And are they both required of one another? And it's such a hard question to answer, because the answer is really no, because you don't really have to have BIM to do prefab. You can do prefab without BIM. Um, you can certainly do BIM and not be prefabbing, but there's a marriage there, and to me it's a point of scale. And I think it sounds like that's where you got to, was that transit that point of traction. When it really started working was whenever you really started doing the BIM side, which really was forcing you to pre-build the building virtually, and then
Yep.
you pull your prefab out of it and move from there. So that's
Yeah.
pretty amazing. And
Well, some of the struggles you have is you send one thing out wrong to the field and you're starting from scratch because it's hard enough to get them on board. And
oh
that
yeah.
that's what was happening before Revit. uh, we'd get it out there and they'd tear it apart or throw it away and do it over anyways. And then you got to work twice as hard to get them back on board or get back to where you were with them.
Yep. Yeah. It was so funny. I've just recently I was working with a company and they were prefabbing their whips and um, the shop had prefabbed and it made a lot of sense. And we went out to the job site and we talked to the folks in the field and they're like, well, yeah, we're prefabbing the whips, but we don't think it's something we want to continue because about 2/3 of them were too short. And
Right.
it's one of those conversation points I have with people specifically around whips and links and stuff like that. By nature in construction, we're all taught over the years that one of the most effective things we can do is save on material. And
Yes, sir.
sometimes that kind of flies in the face of the prefab conversation because just like with whips, if you think the whip should be, is measured and it's supposed to be 39-foot long, you better be sending about 43 to 45 feet because inevitably there's going to be something that comes up. And if there's not enough to get there, it has to get scrapped and they have to redo it. And you'll lose your momentum with the field folks, super fast.
Oh,
It
yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So that particular company is now going to have to rebuild their field personnel to accept the idea of prefabbing whips because they were being a little too careful and too material conscious of what they were
Been
fabricating.
there. Yeah. We're going through a project right now for a customer that we're spooling the wire and doing whips for them. And we'll call it I'll call it a complaint, though I look at it as the success that you've learned from. And their only complaint was that they're too long. It's like we have all this wasted material. Like, okay, let me go back 8 years now, and I'll educate you.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, no, it definitely is interesting. I was teaching a, a BIM class at one of the IBEW locations and doing a class for their, for some folks coming through their apprenticeship program. And
mhm,
it was a BIM topic and we got into prefab. And that was one of the conversation points was, you know, be careful as you're going through the process because you may you may be inclined to feel like, hey, I need to save materials, and so I want to get something to figure out exactly what it is and then try to prefab it exactly. And the
mhm,
conversation was when you're prefabbing, sometimes you want to do a little extra just to make sure you're covered. And it may feel like, hey, that's extra and that's wasted materials, but in the grand scheme of things, from a volume perspective and a manufacturability perspective, that little extra really doesn't equate in the overall cost of things.
right.
But it's such an interesting topic. So
Yeah, labor is your biggest risk on a job, the biggest variable, anyways. You pretty much know what you're going to pay for material and what your budget is, of course, unless you miss something. But my experience through job costing is when uh, I don't spend a whole lot of time on material. We job cost code, and stuff like that, and created a module to know where we're at real time with labor and labor rates and costs and all that. And it was always my intent to evolve that into the material, but we've never really had the need. We just don't have that problem. So even with fabrication.
yeah. So one of the things that I talk a lot about, and this is definitely not an industry sanctioned set of definitions, but it's something that I've developed over the past few years. And the idea behind it is to try to give people a level of qualification of like what level of prefab they might be at in the overall scheme of things. Because one of the things that I've noticed is that people say prefab, and prefab could mean a wide variety of things from from person to person and group to group and company to company. So I've come up with the first one is offsite construction, and the definition for me for offsite construction is essentially doing the same process that you're doing in the field, but just doing it in a warehouse or a shop environment. So pretty much the same steps, the same things, but just doing it in an environmentally controlled environment, shop or something of that nature.
Mhm.
And then prefab is the second tier. And for me, prefab is still doing a lot of the same steps, but starting to add some tools to it that start adding into some automation conversations. So, maybe if you're cutting strut, you get a strut cutter that, is automated and things of that nature. And then the third one, third tier, I call construction manufacturing. And for me, the critical definition is that's the transition when you start functioning a bit more like a manufacturer, but not full blown manufacturing, because that's really not needed in what we do, but a bit more like a manufacturer. Maybe you're making some decisions like a manufacturer, but you're really starting to look at automating, full sequences of events. And
Right.
the other key definition for that is you're also looking to start, not only doing your prefab efforts for your own internal use, but you're also doing prefab efforts that you might be selling to owners or other contractors. And I happen to know from our conversations in the past that you're kind of at that point. You're at a point where you're starting to provide assemblies, for other contractors as part of some of your relationships. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective with that. How's that working? And what is your overall thoughts on that particular part of the process?
Um, on the manufacturing portion, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, it's really exciting. Um, it's a mindset to get to that point. It's not boy, it's so hard to say there's a process you can follow to get there, because you got to really have a team that believes in continuous improvement, of course, and kind of engineering and and looking at like manufacturing. One of the struggles the electrical industry's always had is versus the mechanical. Is the mechanical's always been ahead of us with the modeling, of course, but with machinery or equipment to do their job for them. I've toured mechanical fab shops, and man, they got raw material coming in one door, and straps, fittings, cut to length pipe, cut, welded, going out the other door, and that's pretty cool. So you get out of those, and you come back and you say, oh, you start Googling or flipping through catalogs. What do we got? What can I get to do that? There really isn't much out there, so you got to get creative and 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 finding tools to automate the process, and or to make custom items, stuff like that. Because anybody can have a fabrication shop that buys components and assembles them. And where the industry's going is, as the owners catch on, and I'll back up a little bit. In our area, with the common project, the owners and the engineers haven't adapted the way they construct their facility towards fabrication. They still plan them the original way, so it's hard to build a skid of electrical gear that you're going to place in the middle of the building prior to the structure getting up around it. But there's other projects, most of them coming in from out of state, large data center type projects. We're all aware of those that do get it, and they're changing fast. Just in the last couple of years, we've seen it go from the traditional building, leaving it up to the contractor to figure stuff out, to starting to implement it to be fabricated. Well, what that starts to mean is you got to build not just the components themselves, but you got to or assemble the components, I'll call it, but you got to build some infrastructure for transportation, or holding that assembly together, transporting it, but ultimately so it fits into their environment and they buy into it. Through doing custom materials, custom we'll call it components to assist in that, I've looked for equipment or machinery or whatever to do that, and so CNC machines for doing trench cards. Everybody's using trench cards now for PVC spacers. Well, most are purchasing standard cards from a manufacturer, and you got issues when you do that. One, you're limited as to the customizing it, and two, I don't care what anybody says, we still don't live in the world where we can plan ahead 2 months and be prepared and build this stuff way in advance. We're still building some of this on the fly. Mm-hmm. So it gives us an advantage in those two ways. We now have ironworker machines for cutting and bending and boxing out frames for underground racks. We're custom making trench cards that pipes can go through at an angle rather than just all round holes, and evolved an excellent process for doing that with the help of the Revit type tools that you have. Plasma tables. It's amazing what you can make with a plasma table. We started manufacturing our own custom boxes to where you could cut this box pattern out if you've ever, I've never been good at origami or anything, but I've always been intrigued by it. If you can lay out this pattern on a sheet and plasma cut that thing and go and bend it on a brake and tack or weld it together, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's
And that
usually
gives
one
you
of
an
the
advantage to develop create custom items that you need on the fly.
yeah, it's actually one of the items that I don't want to say every time that I have a company that's wanting to really elevate their prefab or start thinking about the construction manufacturing thing. That is one of the tools that I typically say right out of the gate is just go ahead and get one because you're going to need it and you're going to want it. And
Yeah,
you know because if you don't, then you're in that situation where you're always looking for somebody else that you can purchase that energy or that effort with.
yeah,
And there's companies that do stuff like that, but eventually you're gonna, the more complex or bigger your assemblies get, the more sophisticated they are, the more likely you're going to need that type of stuff. So
yeah,
it's a good
yeah.
one.
You're away from electrical, and again, we'll say it a million times into manufacturing. You're now cutting tube steel and welding and mitering it and building framework, and you gotta paint.
Mhm.
You're now painting, so you got welders, painters, you got CNC operators, you got guys that run on the plasma table, 3D printing, and
Mhm.
it's funny because all of that starts back at that Revit level. We use Revit for designing most all of
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed in my background, there's a little black box there with a little red top, and that's actually my 3D printer. Um,
that. Oh, is it?
but actually, for what I do or what I've been doing for a while, I maintain what I call as a mini maker space in my garage. I've got a laser cutter, a full ceramic studio, full
Oh, a
woodworking shop.
laser cutter.
Oh yeah, oh
Oh
yeah.
man, I'm
Gotta
envious.
gotta have a laser cutter. That's a biggie. um, so let's talk a little bit about. So we talked a little bit about your starting to provide your prefab to other organizations. Um, so I guess my first question would be is, our listeners that we have out there that are listening to this, is that something that they can reach out to you and contact you to say, hey, you know, we want to talk to you about doing some prefab on our projects, or is that
Absolutely.
how's that engagement happen?
Yeah. Contact me. I'd probably be the first point of contact, anyways, and then we talk about type of project doesn't usually matter, but how we interact to do that fabrication design or preparation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that brings me to a topic that I talk a lot about. I refer to it as buy versus build, and
Mhm.
it's always an interesting topic because when organizations, electrical contractors that are, I hate to categorize like small, medium, and large, but there's a lot of the small and medium sized electrical contractors out there that you know they see the writing on the wall. They understand that prefab is something that is important, and offsite construction is important, and they want to be able to get into that, but their organizations just aren't at a scale where they think that they can get started. And the first thing I would say to those folks is, um, it may sound or feel that way or seem that way, but in my opinion, it's easier for a small contractor or subcontractor or contractor to get into prefab than it is for a larger subcontractor to get into prefab. And this just has to do with agile and the change management process that you go through when you start doing prefab. So in my opinion, a smaller contractor can get there quicker, but it's hard to see that whenever you're smaller and you have less of a budget and that sort of thing. And so that brings the conversation to the buy versus build. And I go through this dialogue with almost every company that I talk to, which is there are lots of companies that provide prefab items, like yourself included, that may provide them much more efficiently or effectively or cost effective than what you can even do it yourself, even if you do it internal. And so there's always that conversation, like you commented earlier, you know, you first started buying beeline boxes that were prefabbed, and then you you did the math and said, no, I can make those myself faster and more efficiently. And I think the buy versus build conversation is one that any company that is looking at prefab always needs to go through that part of the conversation just to analyze it and make sure that I refer to it as eyed wise open, business decision. You may go through the process and realize that you can't manufacture it for as cheap as somebody else can sell it to you, but it may be in your best interest from the way your business works to still do it. There's lots of reasons for that. So I guess from that perspective, that buy versus build conversation, are there some assemblies that you would suggest people look at? that's that might be out there and available from be able to purchase a prefab item?
From manufacturers, you mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. One company I'm intrigued by is S&P Products. I think everybody's familiar with them. But boy, they get it. They build some pretty cool stuff. I maybe we can blank this out later. They're pretty pricey.
yeah.
And I look at that and I'm like, I get a lot of ideas from them. And I've had them price stuff before. I'm like, geez, that's kind of tough. But that's me. That's somebody who can manufacture something similar to do the same thing myself. But I could see from a non-fabricating company how that would be very advantageous to them. Absolutely. You don't see much. It's usually the things I see out there, trapeze, box assemblies, roughing kits. What you don't see is, and that's where I'm proud to be evolved to, is you don't see underground racks, you don't see overhead branch racks, you don't see custom items that those people probably don't fabricate because it's a tough process. It takes more than just sketching it out on a PDF or even drawing it in AutoCAD. There's labeling involved. There's sequencing. There's efficiencies obviously too, and that I think is the next jump. There's a lot of small contractors, that bid against each other. They're very competitive. That's where box assemblies is at. That's where maybe trapeze is at and stuff like that. To separate yourself um, in fabrication like you would in contracting, you got to want to be one of the big three, that can man a job, and from the construction standpoint, that separates you, or fabricate items that man are 8 to 10 years ahead of other people because there's a process.
Absolutely, for
Yeah.
sure. So kind of in that same a little bit of that same lines. If you were talking to somebody that's maybe a smaller, medium sized electrical contractor that they are really wanting to get into the prefab world, um, what would be the first things that you might recommend they take a look at as something to prefab?
And you're talking companies that want to do it themselves, or
Yeah, I'd say just somebody that's like, hey, I want to get into prefab and I want to start a prefab shop, but
okay,
what should I start? Where should I start the conversation?
okay, this is an easy one because I've had a handful of contractors, from peer groups to word of mouth that come from out of state and they're not competitors, so I'm very open with them. And one of them in particular, I'm proud of them actually because they wanted to prefab. We want to come and tour your fab shop and understand, want to get something started. And through our conversations, we started at the beginning. We started at the front of the office and looked at our process for layout and modeling, and then went back and showed them everything that we build as a result, and the equipment and the setups and the inventory management, the softwares we used to manage it. And I touched base with him, I don't know, a couple of weeks or a month after that, and said, "So how's it going with fabrication?" And he says, I was so proud of this guy. He says, "We're not ready for fabrication." He says, "We were so intrigued by your layout process. We feel it's important for us to start there." And he's right. He took that learning curve that it took me 5+ years and shortcutted it. If I would have started with layout, man, and push fabrication through that and just
Mhm.
gave the field a good plan and a good product, I would have shortcutted this 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting you point that out. I was going to do a follow-up question, but I think in many ways you answered it in the same question, which is, if somebody was to come to you, and get you to work with them to do prefab, what are some of the critical things that they need to do, as a business to be able to get prefab from someone like yourself to the job site and actually, be able to take advantage of it?
Yeah. So that's where we can provide a great service to somebody who does none of that. Modeling is number one. You got to have somebody modeling your project, and Sandvale does a great job at that. So get somebody to model all your conduits, raceways, place your gear, build the job, and then what we do from there is we don't really touch your model. We reference it in. and use it as a background. We design around it to build spool sheets to break your racks out to whatever length you want to deal with, usually 20 foot. So that's for racks, underground, overhead, and build the framework around it. Because at this point, you got to, if we're building it, we got to ship it. So you got to keep that in mind and how you're going to get it into the ground or placed overhead. There's a lot of collaboration, but all of this can be done. You don't. We could do it over Zoom meetings and stuff like that. Shared, utilize smart sheets is how we're doing it with another contractor that they had actually introduced to us. I'm not taking credit for that one. And there's a lot of collaboration to have, but it's real time collaboration. You know, you share something like that we can shoot a question over through Teams, get a response back fairly quick, and just keep moving.
Hmm.
And then you get into in-wall rough-in assemblies. MC is probably the most successful. You don't. We got away from standard box assemblies. We got a process for. We go and box out the job. Got an adjustable family, so you can pick your plaster ring sizes, depths, 2-gang, 1-gang, whatever, and then whip it all together. But ultimately, provide you a installation plan with your lettered boxes, and all your whips come out labeled and stuff, and we do that in your model, so you have that as an as-built. You have it to review, but we're doing all the work for you, and then share the plans with you and get your buy-in on how you want it to look for your field, how your guys will understand it, and send you the kit.
Nice, very
Yeah.
nice. Now, is there anything like whenever you're working on a project with another company? Is there anything from a field like logistics conversation that that you need to have in place, or is that something you just manage through the process?
No, what's been the most successful, even for our own electrical installations, is to have a guy on their end in charge of the process that gets it, understands the importance of fabrication, but can think outside the box. He's your go-to guy because most people you're doing this for are going to be in another state, or you're not going to be able to go visit their site every day and catch things. So it's very important for that person to be the orchestrator, I believe, for the company that you're fabricating for, to bounce the questions off, be your runner, get answers for you, and most importantly, communicate with the guys in the field, review the plan with them, make sure they understand it, and keep an eye on the installation so they don't end up unboxing that truck and throwing everything in a pile. And at the end, figuring out there's a set of instructions to assemble it, like you were telling me earlier.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and you've hit on it a couple of times, and I can't stress enough for folks is a set of your assembly documentation, what you send to your prefab shop to actually do the assemblies. It can't just be a plan that you get from the design side of the thing, and you just kind of red mark up and, oh, we're going to put a box here and a box here.
Mhm.
You need to actually have truly assembly drawings or spool drawings that show how that assembly goes together, so you can be successful. And then on the install, and you mentioned this earlier, the install for those assembly files can't look the same as the install drawings that you've may have done in the past. It needs to be very specific about exactly how to install that assembly, and not have every other component shown on it.
Right.
I've always been amazed when I looked at install drawings over the years, and people will take kind of the same way they did their drawings in the past that they sent out to the field, and they just kind of drop their assemblies on it and add a bunch more dimensions and a bunch more notes, so it's this big hornet's nest of information.
Right.
And when you get that in the field, it's like, what do I do with this?
That's right.
um, and your install drawings for prefab, you should be super clean. It should be very clear, exactly what components are part of that assembly and how they go together, and your installation for that, the dimensions, you identifying the location, or if you just have points for layout, for a layout system, whatever it is, just needs to be super clean for that assembly, and not trying to feed all of that information into this big bulky drawing that has everything else in the world on it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's as much standardization in layout or creating installation sheets as there is in fabrication or anything else. You want to make sure you use the same colors for the same items all the time. Don't switch colors up on them. Don't fill it with all black dimensions. If like the one of the tricks I use is when I dimension conduits, I do it in red. When I dimension racks, they're black. So whenever they look at a red dimension, it pulls their eye to it, and they know that's for conduit. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and to your point, don't place notes all over the place. Now you're back where you started.
Yeah.
Keep it
Yeah.
the
And
same side.
and it's interesting because I've seen a lot of organizations that their quote unquote assembly drawings or the assembly documents or spill documents are literally the same documents that they send to the field for installation.
Yeah,
And I'm not going to say there's no way that will ever work because I've seen some examples that were actually somewhat successful,
mhm.
but they really are very different things. Putting an assembly together in the prefab shop and installing that item out in the field are entirely totally two different tasks, and they
Yeah,
need different instructions on how to do that.
you bet. It'll confuse one or the other. Fab
Absolutely.
don't care about the field, and the field don't care about the fab element. So you're right.
Absolutely. Well, I did hear the comment about Samveo's modeling services. I thank you so much for the comment. That's
Hey,
appreciated.
there's a lot of truth to that. So.
And I also want to thank you so much for taking the time today and speaking to us and talking about your experiences. I feel like that these types of conversations in this industry are so critical because when people are trying to do these types of things or looking in to get involved in these types of things, understanding somebody else's experiences and some of the things that they've done, is so much better whenever you feel like, hey, I can hear somebody's challenges or things they succeeded at or where the critical points were, and just helps. It just helps the process. So thank you so much for taking the time and providing the information. It was very, very, very helpful and useful.
You're welcome anytime. I could talk prefab all day long.
So is there any there be any like last key message that you would throw out there to the to the webiverse, and if you were going to talk to somebody about prefab, is there any other key thing that you would throw out there for the last thing?
I don't know if it's a key thing, but I do a lot of time. I spend a lot of my effort reminding people where the industry's going. You know, even in the fabrication shop itself, guys want to go work in the field and get that experience. I tell them where, and I see the industry going there right now. It's changed, like I said, just in the last year or two on how projects are being built around here. Customers are catching on the big ones first, and then everybody will follow. It's going to manufacturing. The majority of projects will be built in a offsite environment, and a majority of what you call electrical work will be in a controlled environment fabrication shop.
Perfect. Well,
So
thank you so much.
yeah, don't push back. Get on board. Help your contractor. Help whoever's trying to better their company. Help them get there. Don't point out what's wrong with the process. Help them with new ideas on how to get there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much. And just for everybody to know, again, my name is Lonnie Cumpton. I'm the Senior Director for Industrialized Construction here at Samveo. And as Jeff had mentioned earlier, we have a full list of services that we do, everything from BIM and BIM VDC modeling to electrical engineering to reality capture, and kind of all the different parts and pieces. I personally am bringing a new set of services to Samveo that we refer to as innovation services. And those services are essentially a consulting effort that I can we can come into an organization and help you transform or transition your organization into a prefab state. Whether you're already into prefab or and you want to expand, or if you haven't done prefab at all and you just want to get started, pretty much any state we have a whole consultative service that we refer to as discovery that we can help organizations make those transitions. So I'm super happy to be here, Jeff. Fantastic. I'll leave a few notes about how to be able to get a hold of Jeff in the video notes. And you can also reach Jeff on LinkedIn, and you can reach myself on LinkedIn as well. And I invite anybody that wants to connect to me, feel free to connect to me. And Jeff, thanks again. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Lonnie. Always love talking to you.
All right, thanks.